The following is brought to you by the Starfleet Podcast Network, SPN, The Spin. Just to give you a interesting anecdote. See, I try not to use big words because it fumbles. I've got this speaking out loud kind of thing. You know, I talk well in my head like everyone else does, but you don't want me to read out loud. It's embarrassing.
Red alert.
Welcome to Beyond Trek Podcast. I am BigJ. I am here with special guest Keith DeCandido. Now, just so you all know, I did not spell the first name correctly or pronounce the last name correctly until now. We were talking before and I practiced. I prepped on that. So you've got Keith first. Thank you so much for taking out the time to join me and sit down and do this talk. Was really looking forward to it. And the second one is, and I want to hear this. I want the audience to be able to hear the background on your name, which I thought was pretty interesting. So for all of us out there that have been pronouncing Keith's name incorrectly, and don't act like you didn't, we've all done it wrong. Every one of us. So, Keith, why don't you help us through that? Should we feel bad for not being able to?
Nah.
Okay.
The only way you should feel bad is if I correct you and you continue to mispronounce it.
Yeah.
Or my favorite is when people have tried to correct me right back. It's an Italian,
like you're wrong.
Yeah. I have had that happen. Well, in Italian, it would be pronounced DeCandido, and it's like, well, no, the reason it's pronounced DeCandido is because somewhere back in the deep dark past, members of my family came from a small town in Italy called Candido, and it's pronounced Candido, and the last name is pronounced DeCandido in Italian. So, yeah, it is possible that there are other DeCandidos floating around out there who do pronounce it DeCandido. However, my family is not among them.
Right. That's not you. Nope. Yours don't count. There probably are. You never know.
Yeah. But no, I did have somebody try to Italian-splain to me that it's actually, well, if you pronounce it properly, like in Italian, it's like, well, no.
Was that a Karen at a Starbucks or no, it's a dude? So I guess
no, it was some dude somewhere at a convention, I think.
What's the guy equivalent to a Karen? Would that be a Carl or a?
I don't know.
Chuck?
I know too many. I have too many friends named Karen who are actually nice people, so I've never really liked using that as a thing. But suffice it to say, it was some schmuck, and leave it at that.
Yeah.
But no, it's fine. I've mispronounced other people's names in the past before. Like I said, as long as you correct it once you are informed of the proper pronunciation, everything's fine. I teach. I'm also a martial artist, and I teach karate to kids. I do an after-school program once a week, and one of the things I always make a great effort to do is to make sure I get the kids' names right. Precisely because I've got my own name has been mangled enough times. So same thing when I'm autographing a book for somebody, I want to make sure I get the spelling right. So
well, and that's good to take that extra time and do that because you know what it's like for pretty much living your entire life having to correct people and all of that, and it's got to get tiring.
Yeah.
So you do.
Big part of this job involves repeating myself.
True. Yeah. That's true.
Whenever I'm like doing a convention or doing a panel on something, or I'm at a table, I wind up saying a lot of the same things over and over again because people are asking the same questions, or people want to know, what is this book about? Or what is, how do you break into the field, or where do you get your ideas, or all the other questions that you get asked over and over again. So I'm accustomed to repeating myself. So.
Well, that really has to be tricky. I can tell you, probably for you, there's just the repetition of telling the same thing over and over again. For folks like myself, anyone interviewing you, it's got to be a challenge. I can tell you it's not easy. I try to think of other things to talk about or ask, and have been told, hey, yeah, that's a good question. I try to look for things you haven't heard. at every convention that you went to. It's not always the easiest. I can tell you that. But I'm going to kind of go meta with this. I think this is how I win this one.
Okay, go for it.
Tell me that one thing that you talk about so much that you found yourself not even being able to tell the entire story, that it's been shortened to where your talk at a convention, it feels like I'm not using enough time because I'm giving all these abridged versions of things I talk about it everywhere I go.
There aren't too many of them. There is one. The story of how I got my first fiction sale, which is an unnecessarily complicated story. And I've told it enough times now that I have started to whittle it down a little bit, just because I'm, that's a story that I have told a lot because it was my first one. So I have been telling that story for 29 years now.
That's a long time.
Yeah. So my first fiction sale was a Spider-Man story in a prose short story anthology that came out in 1994, and it came about due to the most ridiculous circumstances. So I told that story a lot, and I have kind of whittled it down a little bit.
That can be. I used to do some journalism work, and when I was in college, my major was broadcast journalism. Okay. And there was this news story, kind of like a news story that we had to do as part of our class. And I went and I interviewed this person who was going to be the subject matter for the story. Mm-hmm. Interviewed her, had these great responses. Everything is good. We talk and all of that. And come to realize when we went back and watched the tape, the guy holding the camera, it was like blurry the entire time. Oh, man. And I'm not talking... You have you don't have a very high resolution, because this was the 90s, so it's not like it's not like students had access to the top of the line cameras. Yeah. So we're not expecting much better than home movie quality camcorders then, but we had a hand-me-down like news station camera. Right. How he managed to do this. So the whole thing's blurry, right? Oh, I was pissed. I was just mad because we do the checks. It's like you stood there and let me go through this entire thing knowing that you didn't really have a good shot. So I decided we can't use this. We can't use any of this. So I arranged time to talk with this lady again, and I was asking the same questions. Not all the same. It's kind of like when you're telling the same story over and over again, you after the fact think, I should have asked this, or I could have worded this differently. Well, what happened was all the responses that I was getting were like real shortened, kind of more rehearsed. Like, okay, I've already said this, I'm going to say it now, and I'm struggling. Like, oh my God, I'm trying to pull more content out, and it was very difficult. And for you, if you're going to be on the stage talking and entertaining, you may have a half hour, and you've got your block of stories that you always tell that eats up a good 15, 20 minutes. But then to your horror, you look at the clock and you realize I've condensed all of these and I'm 10 minutes in.
I've never really had that problem.
It's a good problem not to have.
I can babble with the best of them, so I usually find ways. I still remember one time I was doing a book signing at Barnes and Noble in New Jersey with two fellow authors, Laura Ann Gilman and Josefa Sherman, and we all three of us had Buffy the Vampire Slayer books out, and we were doing a signing to promote that. And the manager at the store comes over and he says, we usually like the authors to give a little talk beforehand. Can you guys talk for an hour? And we just laughed.
Hold my beer.
We could probably cut it down to an hour. Yes.
Cut it down to an hour.
The problem will be getting us to shut up. So
get the hook. That hook comes over from stage right, just yanks you right off. Well, so I'm sure that it was probably tough to stay under that hour. So tell me a little bit more about this karate that you're teaching. I haven't really read a whole lot of that. There's like this pie chart of what information you can see on Keith DeCandido. See, I can do it now. Now I'm proud of myself.
Yep.
Of the work that you do. And I'd have to say, in that pie chart, karate must be one of those parts that not a lot of people know unless you.
It's not like it's a secret, but it's
Right.
it's something I've been doing for actually as of this week, 19 years. I started in 2004.
Mm-hmm.
I prior to 2004, which was the year I turned 35, the only thing I exercised was my futility. I was not what you would call a physically active person.
Right.
It was also at that age that the warranty ran out on my physical form, and
Gotcha.
everything was breaking down. I was in pain. I was overweight, and I was a mess.
You didn't get any calls about your vehicle's extended warranty? I mean, your body's extended warranty?
Apparently not. No. Or I deleted those emails. But so my doctor said, hey, maybe you should try exercising, once. And there was a karate dojo all of 5 minutes walk from my house. And proximity to my own shower was a very important criterion in choosing a dojo.
The closer, the better.
Yeah. And I didn't want to just join a gym because I knew I would give them all my money and never show up. I needed something that was scheduled. And also, I'd always had an interest in the martial arts, just as a observer.
Yeah.
And so I took it up. That first class, I still remember it clearly because it was horrible. Here I was, this out of shape, overweight, 35-year-old lump. Since then, I've gotten a little better at it. I am now a 4th degree black belt. I'm one of the senior black belts in our dojo.
Nice.
I teach occasionally. Like I said, I do the after school program.
Mm-hmm.
For a while, I taught our kids fighting class. That lasted up until the apocalypse of 2020.
Yeah.
At which point, our dojo went virtual for a few months and then went hybrid for a while. But we didn't do fighting classes again for quite some time. Even when we were back training in the dojo, we didn't do sparring. For like a year and a half.
Right.
It wasn't until the fall of 2021 that we started doing fighting again. And at that point, the schedule had changed, and kids fighting was integrated into one of the regular classes rather than a separate class. So I don't teach that anymore. But I still fill in at the dojo periodically when Chiseki Shian Paul, who runs our dojo, whenever he's on vacation or needs a day off or just needs help with something, then I'm one of the people who helps out. And like I said, I do the after school program as well. I've been doing that for 9 years now. At a local school here in New York City. It's part of a larger after school program, and it's fun. Yeah. I never imagined myself as athletic before, and now I can't imagine myself any other way. It's weird. I'm in better shape at 54 than I was when I was 34.
That gives me some hope.
But well, it's because of 19 years of work. I mean, it's not. I earned this. But
that's good. And the gym is getting my money too.
There you go. I enjoy a lot of aspects of it, not just the fact that I am in better physical shape. I like the mental discipline. I like the elegance of the moves and of the different techniques. And it's something that's very meditative also. It's if I'm having a rough day, going to the dojo and doing a class always helps me center myself and helps me feel better. And there's a really good community in the dojo as well of wonderful people who I really just enjoy spending time with. So,
well, I promise everyone we're going to talk about Star Trek eventually.
Well, I've actually, so I have worked in bits of my martial arts training into various Trek novels, certainly in some of the Klingon books I've written.
Yeah, because there's stuff I want to know about. So hold on that just a moment. I want to ask you some very pedestrian questions. Now, they're going to be
I'll try to give you some non-pedestrian answers.
Okay. They're going to be coming from a person that doesn't take karate, watches it on TV. There's, I like Karate Kid, I like Cobra Kai, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
I watched this video about a week or so back that was talking about the fighting style that was created for Batman in the Dark Knight trilogy. Mm-hmm. And I can't describe it. You have to watch those movies and you'd see it's a pretty unique thing. So as an outside observer who has seen plenty of fights on YouTube, TikTok, etc., every fight seems to be the same. Everyone's coming in with these wide haymakers and just diving in. Now, coordinated fighting looks awesome, of course, because it's coordinated. You're doing the thing. Is there really? How do you take that from the dojo and put it out in real life? If you were to find yourself in a confrontation, and okay, this is going to get physical. Would that person, knowing that everyone fights ugly, we all have it in our heads. To me, I know for sure that if I ever got into a fight, it would look like I was Batman with all the moves and everything. But how do you counter someone that's just throwing arms and fists around, ugly fighting, like you see on pretty much every fight video online?
Mostly you try to avoid it. There's a Gijin Funakoshi, who is pretty much the founder of modern karate. He was from Okinawa. And he, in his autobiography, he writes about how people used to challenge him to fights all the time, and he would always turn it down. Any fight between any two people, regardless of their skill level, is going to be unpredictable because you don't, it's by nature chaotic. So you don't know what's going to happen. So, if I was going to be in a confrontation, my first thing would be to try to avoid it. It's a last resort, not a first one. And, it's because yes, 99 times out of 100, the better fighter is going to win, but there's always that 100th time. Yeah. And you don't want to risk it being that. When I first started sparring, I would fight the person who runs our dojo, who has won international fighting tournaments. He's a brilliant fighter. And I was, still a color belt. I was still, learning what the heck I was doing. And there was one time where I managed to kick him right in the solar plexus. It was a 1 in a million shot. And I was so proud of
1 million, Doc. 1 in a million.
Yeah, exactly. And it was great, but that can happen. Even with him, this incredibly experienced fighter fighting this, doofus yellow belt who's, doesn't know what he's doing yet.
Got that lucky shot.
Yeah, but the that can happen. If I am fighting, if I thankfully have not found myself in a position where I have been in a fight. I was in a position once to break up a fight, which my training helped me see coming.
Okay.
This was between two high school kids. And I immediately got between them and pushed them apart before it actually came to blows, at which point their friends, who were all smarter than them, held them back.
Yeah.
But, the only thing, if somebody is fighting wild and crazy, is just, keep your hands up and wait for your shot. The most common phrase uttered in my kids' fighting class was keep your hands up. The best thing you can do is just, keep your hands up and protecting yourself, because it's much better for your arms to get hit than for your head or your chest, because there's important stuff in your head and your chest.
Yeah. The arms can take a whole hell of a lot more of a beating than the other parts.
And they heal more readily too.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. So even though I think we all imagine that we can take on that black belt, if you're just some doofus walking on the sidewalk, don't do it, because you're definitely going to get your ass kicked. So there's that.
Like I said, mostly you're going to try to avoid it. But
yeah. Now you write novels, short stories, comics. I like comics, and I like comics. I want to talk about that some, because I feel like I'm not able to meet someone that often that does writing in the comics. Now, we've talked to on our podcast David Mack and I'm John Swallow and some of the other ones, and I think that learning more about the comics and the writing for that as compared to anything else is something that I want to know more about, just as someone who hasn't really thought a whole lot about what it goes into comic book writing.
It's much different than writing prose, and it's also different from writing a screenplay, because you're dealing with visuals, but they are both static and kinetic at the same time. Mm-hmm. And each page and each panel is a distinctive work of art, in essence, that you're contributing to. Personally, whenever I'm writing a comic, and I haven't done a huge amount of comics, but I've written a bunch. I've written in Star Trek. I've done one miniseries and then a 4-issue miniseries, as well as a couple one-shots. And I've written a StarCraft comic, a Resident Evil comic book. I'm currently working on an adaptation of a horror novel that I co-wrote with a colleague called Animal, and I'm working on the graphic comic book adaptation of that right now. But the big thing was I did a comic based on the TV show Farscape. I worked with Rockne O'Bannon, who created the show, and we did a comic book that continued Farscape from after its finale. And when you're writing the comic, you're thinking, in essence, you're thinking of each page as a discrete storytelling unit, in essence. And what it looks like and how the art is going to flow and how the words are going to be. And your writing is different because it's mostly dialogue. It's not most of what would be narration in a prose work is covered by the artwork for the most part. Plus, while you can do, thought balloons, although those have fallen out of favor a lot, you can't do the kind of serious internal point of view that prose can do. Prose, you're inside the point of view of a particular person. Comics can't really do that as well. But it's fun. It's and on top of that, usually most comic books, especially if you're writing like a monthly comic book, like it was with Farscape, you have a very prescribed number of pages, and you have to fit into that. Every issue of Farscape that I wrote was 22 pages. Mm-hmm. The Resident Evil comic book that I did was 5 20-page issues. So each story had to begin on page 1 and end on page 20. And you have to do it in that space, which really challenges you, because you have to make everything fit and everything flow in that precise time frame. That is one way in which it is like screenwriting, because, especially teleplay writing, because TV shows are generally a particular length. And so you have to write to that particular time frame.
Right. Well, there's if I'm reading a Star Trek book or listening to an audiobook, reading a comic, anything like that, we've been in it so long that we can imagine the scenes, we hear the voices, we know the voices, et cetera, et cetera. Mm-hmm. Now, when you're writing something different, like Resident Evil or Farscape, to me, it would almost feel like if I'm going to do any kind of writing, it's going to be what I know inside and out, Star Trek. If I write Farscape or Resident Evil or whatever it may be, sure, I could probably make it interesting, probably captivating, but do you find that not knowing those characters like that, as you do with Star Trek, makes it more difficult to do those comics and short stories? Or is it easier because you don't have in your head, oh, I've got to get out this, I've got to do this backstory, I know all these things and somehow I have to fit it all in?
Well, that doesn't apply to Farscape because I know Farscape at least as well as I know Star Trek.
Oh, okay.
I was a huge Farscape fan when that was on the air. And I wrote one of the tie-in novels, and I wrote some short stories for it while it was still on the air.
It was a good series. I thoroughly enjoyed it.
I absolutely adored that series. So I was as immersed in that in its own way as I have been in Star Trek. Having said that, every time I do a project, whether it's Star Trek, whether it's Resident Evil, whether it's Farscape, whether it's my own original fiction, like I have a series that's 6 novels now and counting, called the Dragon Precinct series, which is a mix of epic fantasy and police procedural.
Ooh.
What I'm doing, I mean, that's a world of my own creation. Characters are my own creation, but the process when I'm doing a new story and it is still the same as it is when I'm doing a work of licensed fiction, is I have to immerse myself in the world. I will do in-depth research. If I'm writing a Star Trek novel or if I'm a short story, I'm going to sit and watch whatever episodes are relevant to what I'm doing. Like when I did the Farscape comic book, even though I knew Farscape very well, I still sat down and I watched the entire series again.
Sure.
I wrote a Leverage novel based on that show back. Actually, the novel wound up coming out right after the show was canceled, unfortunately. But even though I watched the show religiously every week, I still sat down and I rewatched everything again to get the character voices in my head, to get the storytelling style in my head, to get the visuals in my head. That process is going to be the same regardless, even if it's something I think I know.
Yeah.
I
you think you know until you start writing it down and realize,
exactly.
Wait a minute.
And you want to make sure you get it right. And it helps to immerse yourself in it.
Mm-hmm.
When I wrote back in 2014, I wrote the Klingon Art of War, and I rewatched every Klingon episode basically of all the TV shows up to that point. This was before the latest wave of shows had debuted, but I rewatched all the Klingon episodes of the original series of Next Gen, of DS9, Voyager, Enterprise, the movies that the Klingons were in, and just to look for stuff and look for things that might help make the work better. So, and I also reread a bunch of Klingon stuff, both my own and other authors.
Speaking of Klingon, I love the picture behind your left shoulder, Worf and a polar bear.
That is the cover of my first Star Trek novel.
Okay.
Diplomatic Implausibility, which came out in 2001.
Yes.
And that's the original artwork, which I purchased from Sonia Helios, the artist. Because that was my first Trek novel. And it was Worf's first mission as a Federation ambassador.
Oh, okay.
Following the Deep Space Nine finale.
For that 2 weeks that he was ambassador before he had to somehow end up on the Enterprise again.
It was actually 4 years, but
the events of Nemesis. Okay, all right.
Yeah, there was 4 years between What You Leave Behind and Nemesis, and I actually not only got to write Worf's first mission, I also got to write his last mission.
Yeah.
In the novel A Time for a Time for Peace, I basically explained how he wound up back. And the thing is, diplomatic posts are not permanent anyway, as a general rule.
Right.
And I made it work. And I wrote several adventures that he had while serving as a diplomat.
That had to be hard. Like, why?
No, not at all.
Why torture yourself with a character that is from a warrior race and write about him being a diplomat?
Because if you actually sit down and watch, Worf would have made a great diplomat. He actually did. There's a lot of stuff that happened to him, both on Next Gen and Deep Space Nine, that presaged him being a good diplomat. Not the least of which being, the influence he had over the previous 2 Klingon chancellors and how they came to power. What he did in Sins of the Father, what he did in The Emissary, the first episode with Kalar, the solution he came up with there. There've been several occasions. What he did in Tacking Into the Wind when he challenged Gowron, and then basically installed Martok. He's actually got quite a lot of diplomat in him. He is good at coming up with solutions to problems. Rightful heir also, when he came up with the notion of him being made of Kalis being made emperor.
That was smart. That was a smart move.
There's lots of stuff in his history that points to him being actually pretty good at being a diplomat. And who better to represent the Federation to the Klingon Empire than somebody who is basically a citizen of both of them?
It's a perfect choice, that's for sure. And I'm running several episodes in my head that are Worf-centric episodes. And I think when you put it together, you can see it as this character has been spread out over 7 seasons of Next Gen and 3 seasons of DS9. It was 4, 5, 6, 7. I was counting it like it was real math and not.
Math is hard.
Yes, it is. Yeah,
and now another season of Picard as well. So.
Yeah. So I think you're right. Now, this season of Picard, yes, I could certainly see that diplomat side. I guess I didn't really see it as much before, because when that was done in What You Leave Behind, I just thought, huh? Worf?
It makes perfect sense. And on top of that, and this is something I played up on in the novel this is the cover for, is it's also a position that both the two great loves of his life had. That was Kalar's position when she died, and it was also Curzon Dax's job, which was Jadzia's previous host. So in a lot of ways, taking that post is continuing the work done by both of them.
Okay. That makes sense.
Yeah.
I think it was a good pick to do that, because you're filling in something that at the time you could not have seen. And I'm sure that a lot of people they couldn't see that, and you showed us. You did all this literature about that.
I was disappointed when he was just back in Starfleet without explanation in Nemesis, but we made it work. The other cool thing that enabled me to do was to write a story that teamed up Worf and Spock, which jokingly referring to them as the fighting ambassadors. And I actually got to have them, because Worf and Spock actually have a lot in common. And I had them doing a mind meld, which was necessary basically to help Spock out because of what was happening in the story. This is in my 2-book series, The Brave and the Bold. And I had so much fun with that. That was writing Spock and Worf. And then after the mind meld, you've got a much calmer Worf and a much crankier Spock. And sort of with, a little bit
of it.
And it was so much fun. I really enjoy. I've only written Spock a few times. That was one of them. Brave and the Bold. And I also wrote him in Articles of the Federation. And he's a wonderful character to write, because there's so much to him. And putting him and Worf together was just gold. Absolutely gold.
Yeah. It sounds like it. I'm going to have to check that one out. Now, is there a story, whether it be a comic, a novel, short story, whatever it is, do you have one out there that if you had one wish, you would completely wipe it away from the existence of time? Like, no one ever heard of it. I can't read it. Let's just forget it completely. Which one is that for you?
I don't really have one. There's, I mean, I can't think
not
of
so much that you hate it. Let me make it not so dire. Just one that you kind of like, I could never read this one again.
I can't think of anything.
Okay.
I'm happy with what I've done. I mean, there's plenty of them I look at and I think, oh my God, I wish I could rewrite it, or at least edit it a little more. There was, in particular, there's one novel that I wrote, one of the 3 novels I wrote based on Supernatural. I wish I could have taken another pass at it, because I wrote that novel while I was going through a very ugly breakup, and it was not my best work. I'm still happy. I mean, nobody who's reading the book is going to know that, and I think they'll be, and generally the response to the book has been fine. But there's just when I've read it over since, I'm looking at it and thinking I needed to take another pass at this.
Yeah.
That was frustrating. But no, I'm generally pleased with, I actually, I during, in 2020, I started up a YouTube channel, which I originally called Crad COVID Readings, and I've since renamed to Crad Readings because I'd like to get past that.
Yeah.
But started something to while we were in lockdown, something to entertain people and to entertain myself. And I've been reading all my works of short fiction. So I have recently reread, within the last 3 years, reread every single work of short fiction I've written. And there was nothing in there that I was particularly embarrassed by or annoyed by. And all my novels, same thing. I some are better than others. There's a couple of tie-ins, like there's one, and I'd rather not say which one it is, where I wish I had done a little bit better with it, but it was hard because of the circumstances under which I wrote it.
Okay.
There are two like that, actually. But one of them, of those two, one of them sold so poorly that nobody read it anyway. So, and the other one is sold phenomenally well. So I really can't complain because it was, even though I wish I had done better with it, I can't argue with the results. So,
You just mentioned one of the writings you did that happened during a bad breakup.
Yeah.
There is a kind of a script, like a movie script. A friend of mine had this idea of doing, and I did the writing on it. I haven't gone back and reread it. It's, this thing is well over 15 years ago that we did that. But thinking about it and how I wrote it and the way the subject matter is handled really reminds me of the frame of mind I was in at that time in life. And a lot of that stuff came out in the writing. So how much of your frame of mind goes into this that you recall, when I was writing this was what was happening in life, or this is where I was at?
Well, like the one I mentioned, the supernatural book, was not not my best work, isn't it? Otherwise, not so much where there are certain things that have come up because of things that were happening at the time. I wrote the Star Trek novel. I wrote Articles of the Federation. I wrote that in 2004. When we were deep in the throes of the campaigning for the 2004 presidential election between George W. Bush and John Kerry, but I finished it before the election actually happened. Which was and that actually helped me because I'm something of a presidential election junkie. Okay. And so I've always been fascinated by the campaigning process and the what goes into campaigning and the governance and whatnot. And that was perfectly timed for me. Cause I was really excited by what was going on. I was not as happy with the result, but still, I was in the right frame of mind for that, and I don't think I would have been if I had been writing it after the election was over or like in the middle of
it sounds like the frame of mind that you're in really matters when you're going to write.
Sometimes I write the story I want to write usually.
Right.
Yeah, it can't. It certainly has an impact to some extent, but but also, I'm writing the book that I'm supposed to write that at that particular time. It's this is my job still. Yes, I'm creating art, but it's also what I do for a living. And there's sometimes where I'm not in the right mood, where my frame of mind is off for it, and it doesn't matter because the deadline's still going to be there. So
you've got to do it regardless.
Yeah. You just got to plow through and put one word in front of the other. And it may not be the best work, but that's what revisions are for. So.
Right. Okay. And do you have I guess favorite topic may be the way to go, but are there any that you wish, if I did have to pick one thing that I'm just going to spend all of my time on, I'm going to guess it's between Farscape and Star Trek, and I'm trying to guess which one it might be, and I'm going to say Farscape. I think I get the feeling that if you had to pick one, that was it for the rest of your career, it'd be Farscape.
No.
I'm off on that one.
Yeah, I wouldn't. I mean, there are worse fates. Yeah. But I wouldn't mind that. But if I had to stick with one particular thing, I would rather it was one of my own worlds.
Okay.
I've got several different original series going. I mentioned the Precinct series, which is the mix of epic fantasy and police procedure. I love writing those books. I've got a cycle of urban fantasy short stories set in Key West. A bunch of stories, another set of urban fantasy stories taking place in New York. I just did a deal for a new urban fantasy series that also takes place in New York. That's a bit more. It's another fantastical police procedural. It's about a unit of the New York Police Department that deals with crimes involving magic and monsters. It's called the Supernatural Crimes Unit.
Oh,
and that's my next big writing project. I'm starting on that.
That sounds like fun.
Yeah, and we're still finalizing the paperwork on that. But I would rather spend the time in one of my own universes, just because. If I had to choose a licensed universe, then it probably would be Star Trek, just because that's been so much a part of my life, literally since birth.
Haven't we all?
Yeah. My parents watched Star Trek, the original series when it aired. And watching it was part of our weeknightly routine when I was growing up. I live in New York, and it was the original series was rerun on Channel 11, one of the independent stations here in New York. Every weeknight at 6:00, and that was what we did. At 6:00 we watched Star Trek. At 7:00 we eat dinner.
That's a good routine.
Yeah,
I like that routine.
I grew up with Star Trek, and there has never been a time in my life when I wasn't watching / reading / consuming Star Trek in some form or other. I read the James Blish novelizations, or adaptations rather, when I was a kid. And then I started reading the Trek novels when I was in high school. I read the comic books. I played FASA's role-playing game back in high school and college. I've always jumped to see each movie as they've come out. I've watched, I at least started watching every TV show. And since 1999. There has never been a time when I wasn't either writing for or about Star Trek. Between the writing I do for Tor.com, the other nonfiction articles I've done for various magazines and anthologies and essay collections and such, and the fiction I've done. I haven't done a novel in a while. I've been doing short stories for the magazine for the last the last 2 issues of the magazine had stories by me in them, and I've got a story in the next one, and then 2 more coming out next year. So, and I've done work for the role-playing game. I've done, I did the Klingon Art of War. The Star Trek has been a constant in my life, and very much so in my career for the last 24 years. So,
let's go back just a little bit. We were talking about politics. And what that got me thinking of, there's a lot of websites, message boards, forums, anything where someone can offer their 2 cents and it's on if something is about Star Trek and some kind of political message or satire, you will always see at least one comment in this thing from someone saying, can we keep politics out of it? This politics, that's not my Star Trek. Okay, but Star Trek is inherently political. It's politics all over. And for some reason, people feel that politics is being inserted into Star Trek in some fashion that it's not supposed to be. Like making Pokemon political, I can see that. Let's not do that. But you're talking about Star Trek where it completely applies. Do you ever see comments like that? And what do you want to say to people that somehow forgot?
I don't want to actually say anything. I just want to walk away from them.
It's probably better that you did. Yeah.
And when did Star Trek get woke? And the answer is 1966.
When it started.
Yeah. It, part of it is it's not that they don't want politics in Star Trek. It's that they don't want politics that aren't theirs in Star Trek. And it's also an inability to understand how radical Star Trek was in 1966. It's not very radical now. You look at it now and it's actually very sexist in a lot of ways and not nearly the commentary is not, well, while it was incredibly radical for the late 60s, nobody would bat an eyelash at it now, but that's partly because of how television has changed and how much the world has changed. But Star Trek has always been about commenting about current events in some form or other, and it's always been about humanity bettering itself. And I mean, one of the reasons why I answered your previous question with Star Trek is because it's a future that I want to believe in. I don't think it's going to happen, but it's one I would love to see.
Have you ever sat down and tried to explain to yourself what post-scarcity is and what that means? And you probably come to the same conclusion that we all do. Someone has to want to be the plumber. Somebody has to want to be the one that picks up the garbage. That's the problem with the whole concept.
Yes. But I also love the idea of a medical tricorder that will tell you what's wrong with you so that, you don't have to worry about being gaslit by doctors who don't, want to help you or who don't understand, only have a limited understanding of certain fields of medicine.
We can grasp all these things, but when it comes to politics, wait a minute.
But in general, what I love about Star Trek is that it's about compassion. It's about getting along. It's about humanity being better. It's about not discriminating against people. It's about, and in particular, I keep coming back to this. What's great about Star Trek is that it almost always goes for the compassionate solution rather than the violent one.
Yes.
Whether it's in the Corbomite maneuver, when even though Balak's ship nearly destroyed the Enterprise, Kirk still goes and helps them when they're in distress. In Deep Space Nine, the Dominion War did not end because of military superiority. It ended because Odo agreed to go back to be a part of the Great Link. In Discovery, the burn was reversed because they were able to rescue a 100-year-old child.
Yeah.
And bring him back home. And for that matter, the fourth season of Discovery, which was probably the most purely Star Trek season that they've done in 50 plus years, which is because it was literally about seeking out new life and new civilizations and talking.
And the science, the math, the exploring, the critical thinking skills.
Right. That whole season was about seeking out new life and trying to understand it and come to an understanding so that nobody would get hurt.
We did not know that our bulldozer was doing what it was doing.
Right.
We were just trying to dig up some of this, but where we see a construction site, big construction zone, we're just, trying to get this stuff. You're all these little life forms smaller than the grains of sand. The grains of sand to us are these other stars, and we didn't think anyone was living around those. So we've got to stop scooping up the dirt.
And I love that that's always been the hallmark. It's through compassion, through thinking, through finding ways to resolve problems without violence where possible. And that, and some might see that as political, but also just the notion that there is, at least theoretically, no prejudice, that it, in 1966, it was incredibly radical. Here we are in the midst of civil rights unrest, of wars both cold and hot. And you've got on the bridge of the Enterprise a black woman, an Asian man, and a Russian guy working alongside the white people.
Yeah.
Not the 20-year alien. And
right.
But he comments on it. It's that part in particular. It's not unusual. The fact that Sulu is Asian is not nearly as important as the fact that he likes botany and collects guns. The fact that her is black is not nearly as important as the fact that she likes music. The fact that Cisco is black is less important than the fact that he likes to cook. The fact that Bashir is Arab doesn't even, come up. All of that, is that's a very important thing, is that it's all these different people working together. One of the things that both my wife and my mother have commented about Discovery is that they love the fact that you see different women of different physical types, of different skin tones, of different interests, and none of them are sexualized.
Right. Well, we're not in 90s Trek.
Star Trek has not always been great about that, although it's interesting. I didn't realize it until I sat down and was rewatching them for Tor.com. For 3 straight shows, we had a character who was cast mainly because she was an attractive woman.
Yes.
And in 2 of those 3 cases were put in costumes that emphasized their physical attributes.
Yes.
And yet, all 3 of them, Jadzia Dax, 7 of 9, and T'Pol, all were able to rise above that, mainly partly through the writing, partly through the performances of the 3 actors in question, to become phenomenal characters. Some of the most in-depth characters, despite the endless male gazing of them.
Yeah.
And now on the new shows, you're not getting the male gazing part, you're just getting the cool part, including 7 of 9 herself being in Picard. And also, but wearing more sensible outfits,
more appropriate clothing.
Yeah. And you've got Burnham and Tilly and all and Reno and all
Detmer.
And Detmer and Oshik and all these different, and it's great. And you're also seeing different races, different orientations. We're especially finally seeing non-heteronormative relationships in Star Trek, which was way overdue. Just the fact that everybody is working together, everybody accepts everybody else's differences, and embraces it. There was a great line in Strange New Worlds in at Astra Perispera, the one where number 1 was on trial, was being court-martialed, where she said that she saw the first Starfleet ship she saw when she was like 5 or 6, and all these different people from all these different planets working together, and it was beautiful. That's Star Trek. It's people working together. The idea of the Federation is ridiculous, and it's awesome at the same time, because you've got 150 people who from different planets working together. That was something I emphasized in Articles of the Federation, which
I can't even manage a group project.
And you're all the same species.
Yeah. You know how hard that is.
But and I wanted to emphasize that in the novel, that you've got people from different worlds all sitting in the same room, running a government, and it works. And we got to see it, in that novel. We saw it in Discovery also. I love the fact that they made the Federation president a recurring character. That made me very happy. Yeah. The cooperation there that we saw in season 4. And even things like, watching the progress, watching the Klingons go from being the Federation's enemies to their staunchest allies.
Yes.
That was something that when he created Next Generation, Gene Roddenberry specifically wanted that prediction that was made in Errand of Mercy back in the first season when we first met the Klingons, when Aelborn said, in the future, you and the Klingons will be fast friends. He wanted to see that come true. And then again on Discovery, when we see in the 32nd century that Spock's dream of reunification between the Vulcans and the Romulans also came true. All that is.
It took almost 800 years, or hundreds, thousands.
Yeah, progress is a process.
Yeah.
And that, that hopefulness is what makes Star Trek so wonderful. And if people see it as political, that says more about them than it does about what Star Trek is doing. If Let That Be Your Last Battlefield isn't political, but somehow having a gay couple on the Discovery is, then your definition of political is a little off.
It is. You're right, because those are, and I think you hit the nail on the head, is that if it's not my viewpoint, if it's not my politics, then I shouldn't have to see it or hear it or read it at all. And I think that's a good point there. Wait, Keith, I want to say thank you very, very much for taking the time out to sit with me tonight and do this talk. I've learned a lot of things from you about the writing process, what motivates you, frame of mind you can be in when writing, and how that can affect whether it's positive or negative what you're working on. Do you have anything in regards to projects you have coming up, social medias that you want to talk about and promote to get some people looking more at your work?
I'm easy to find online. If you just search for my name, I'm the only Keith DeCandido that will turn up. I do have a website. It's horrible, but it does serve as a link dump to all the various places you can cyberstalk me. I post regularly on both Facebook and Instagram and whatever it is Twitter is now.
Right, yeah.
I don't know how much longer Twitter is going to last, how long I'm going to stay there, but I'm staying there for the time being, at least. I haven't figured out which of the new Twitter substitutes I'm going to use, if any. I'm going to see how they shake out before I start joining them. But I am on, like I said, I'm on Facebook. You can just search me on there. All my posts are public on Facebook. So, and I have both a fan page and a personal page. You can follow either one of those. And they both have the same content. I'm on Twitter at Craddock. I'm on Instagram at Crad418. I have a blog because I'm old. Again, if you search for it, it's on, if you go to DeCandido.net, there's a link to the blog. It's on WordPress, decandido.wordpress.com. I mentioned the YouTube channel before. That's a month that now it is a monthly channel where each month I read a new one of my short stories. And then I also have a Patreon, which helps keep some of the bills paid. I do regular TV reviews, movie reviews, excerpts from my works in progress, vignettes featuring my original characters, first looks at my first drafts, and also cat pictures.
Love the cat pictures.
Cat pictures is one of the most popular tiers on there. Not surprising. And as for works coming out, I have two anthologies that came out recently that I have stories in, one of which I also co-edited. One is called Double Trouble, an anthology of two-fisted team-ups, which is a collection of stories of team-ups of classic characters. Captain Nemo meets Frankenstein's monster. Prospero meets Don Quixote. Stuff like that. And I've got a story in there that teams up Aisha, the title character from H. Rider Haggard's novel She, who teams up with Igungan Oya, who is a goddess in the Yoruba pantheon. So it's basically two immortal, kick-ass African women.
Yes, awesome.
In 2017 Philadelphia.
That's a twist.
And I've also got a Sherlock Holmes story, an anthology called Cases by Candlelight, Volume 2, which has 4 new Sherlock Holmes stories by myself, Christopher D. Abbott, Aaron Rosenberg, and Michael Jan Friedman. And my story is called The Thick Blue Line, and I had a lot of fun with that. I hadn't written the canonical Sherlock Holmes before. My Resident Evil comic book is still being published. It's a 5-issue miniseries. The first 3 issues are out from Tokyo Pop. It's called Infinite Darkness: The Beginning. It is a prequel to the Infinite Darkness animated series that's on Netflix. It features the fan favorite character of Leon stopping an attack in Pittsburgh. And the latest Precinct novel is Phoenix Precinct. That's currently available. I co-wrote a Star Trek Adventures module called Incident at Krav 3 with Fred Love, which is available from Odysseus. I have a story in the 8th issue of Star Trek Explorer called The Callidian Kidnapping. It's a Star Trek Voyager story. And there's some other stuff too. I've got some anthologies coming out soon that I have stories in, including Weird Tales 100 Years of Weird, which is celebrating the 100th anniversary of Weird Tales magazine. And I've got an original story in that. And there's a Joe Ledger anthology that Jonathan Mayberry and Brian Thomas Schmidt put together, which is based on Jonathan's Joe Ledger series of fantastical thrillers. And I wrote a story for that. Joe Ledger Unbreakable, it's called. It's a weird Western anthology called The Good, the Bad, and the Uncanny that I have a story in. Mm-hmm. And some other stuff as well. I write for Tor.com. I'm doing a Star Trek Enterprise rewatch. I'm in the 4th season now. And each time there's a new episode of Star Trek show on Paramount Plus, I will be reviewing it for Tor.com. As we record this, it's Lower Decks that I'm working on because we're in the 4th season of that. And I've got reviews of every episode of Discovery, Picard, Strange New Worlds, and Lower Decks, as well as some overview pieces on Star Trek Prodigy. And you know, with each new season that comes, each new episode that comes out, I will be talking about it on there. And I also write the Great Superhero Movie Rewatch for Tor.com, which was a weekly feature from 2017 to 2020, and which I revive every 6 to 12 months to cover new live action movies based on superhero comics. I've covered every single one of them to date. Well, every single one of them up to the end of 2022.
Wow.
It will cover the 2023 ones at the end of this year.
That is excellent. That's awesome. So that's a lot of you take a breath. And so
stuff too. If you find me online, I'll tell you all about it.
Yes. Find Keith DeCandido. God dang it. See, I had it. I knew it. It just, I need one mulligan. But Thank you. So there shouldn't be a difficult time finding you online, which is great. Good luck to you. And just all of these things that you work on and that you've got going. And it was great. It was a pleasure being able to talk to you. And it was great for our audience to hear some more about you. And, that's all I got. So thanks again.
We are Beyond Trek Podcast. Lower your inhibitions and surrender your ears. We will add inspirational and hilarious Trek content to your day. Your attention will adapt to subscribe to us. Resistance is futile.
If you enjoyed this podcast, you can support us at patreon.com/BeyondTrek.